Hey guys and gals, welcome back to another episode of BassQuest. I'm excited about today. We're going to do a similar format to the last video in that we're going to have some video or footage playing of me catching some fish actually in the fall on a crankbait. But I'm going to be doing some dialogue about something very important for you coming up, and that is late winter fishing, or what we call early pre-spawn fishing. In that transition period, because a lot of times it's real hard for guys to stay on the fish and to understand how fast those fish move, why they move, when they move, and just some of those specifics related to that. So sit back and I hope you enjoy. Okay, when we're talking about late winter or early pre-spawn fishing, there's some important things to realize. One of these is that a lot of times these fish will actually move up much earlier than you think, and they'll move up regardless of the air temperature outside and the water temperature. And that's what's really strange. You know, a lot of times guys will be fishing their same winter patterns, all of a sudden the fish are gone, but it's a very winter-like conditions out there. You'll have really cold temperatures, really cold water temperatures, and all of a sudden the fish are all 10 feet, 8 feet or less. I mean, they're really shallow all of a sudden. So we're going to talk about why that happens. Well, around this time, around the Chickamauga and the Tennessee River systems, we're talking this moon phase. You get a full moon in February, and then you get what's called the waning moon or the waxing moon in the middle of February, and then you get the first full moon in March. Sometime between that middle of February, early March, those fish will start making that transition. And it'll happen, like I said, regardless of how cold it is outside. What happens is you start getting longer days. And the fish, they just key in on that. The moon phase, the longer days, they instinctually know it's getting close to time. They need to get up there, they need to start scouting around, getting in that pre-spawn mode. And so a lot of times the bigger fish in the lake, they'll go ahead and pull up into that super shallow water, and it might be 38 degrees. It might be sleeting, it might be snowing outside, but regardless of that, they're going to be up there and doing their thing. So like I said, these fish are going to be shallow, and so when you target them, you know, when you start losing that winter bite, when you start throwing that rig, and all of a sudden, instead of counting it down and fishing 16, 18, 20, 30 feet deep, all of a sudden you start reeling that thing straight in, and you're catching fish 10 foot deep, 8 foot deep. You know it's starting to be time for those fish to move up. And so what you're going to do is you're basically going to fish shallow, and you're going to fish shallow with some shallow water baits or techniques. One thing great about this time is that a lot of times you'll get the real big fish, like I mentioned before. Sometimes the biggest fish in the lake will move up first. And not only that, not only will they move up, but instead of being big, solitary loner fish like they are a lot of times in the winter time and in the summertime, what will happen is they'll actually group up. You'll have these schools, wolf packs, whatever you want to call them, of big female fish. And they're not necessarily actively feeding, sometimes they are, but they'll be grouped together on key areas, and if you know what you're looking for, you can target those fish and really rack up some big bags, sometimes in just a few casts. You know, sometimes less than 10 casts you might have 25, 30 pounds. So you never know, and you got to really spend the time to find these areas ahead of time. Okay, now let's talk about some areas where these fish will be. What will happen is they'll start to migrate into the back of the creeks. They'll start to migrate onto flats, to ditches. They'll be close a lot of times to these wintertime holes, you know, out on the main river, but they're working their way in. It might be the first third of a creek. It might be the back of a flat, working their way down a ditch to the really shallow spawning area of a flat or a pocket. So you got to work your way back into those areas and fish the right stuff in order to find these fish. A lot of times they still want to be decently close to deep water. Now deep water is a relative term. You know, that could be 10 feet of water. If there's a ditch leading back into a slough or a flat, it could be 30 feet of water in a creek channel. But the fish themselves a lot of times will be in 6 foot or less of water. One key is to work into spawning areas. So these fish are going to be on their way towards that stuff. So you want to be either working your way from a spawning area out. Some guys like to fish from the back of a spawning cove out in order to find the fish. That way they make sure that they get that first wave. Some guys like to fish from the outside in. So however you want to do it, you're wanting to move, you're wanting to cover water. You're looking for, if I'm in a creek, I'm going to look for secondary points moving in. What they call, you hear a lot of pros talking about highways, whether that's a ditch, creek channel, like a creek channel swing. But secondary points are key to me, and you're looking for structure first. So when you're talking about, a structure is a ledge, a structure is a hump, a structure is something that's a part, like a saddle of the contours of the lake. You're not necessarily looking for cover. If you're in these situations, find your structure first, and a lot of times the fish will either be on the structure or they'll be on some kind of cover that's on that structure. That cover could be grass, that cover could be a laydown, it could be a little bit bigger boulders out on the shell bed. You never know what it's going to be, but really follow those routes, those ditches, those highways in, find the structure first, and that's how you'll find these groups of bigger fish. And the key is to don't stop until you find the right fish. A lot of times you'll have males that'll move up. Sometimes the big females move up before the males. Sometimes the males move up before the bigger females. So if you're catching, you go down, you find a spot, and you catch maybe 3 or 4 1 to 2 pound fish in a really short amount of time, that's great. You might want to come back to that area later in the day just for fun if you don't do anything else. But what I would encourage you to do is to go ahead and leave that spot, keep running down that area, and see if you can key in and find those bigger females. They may be very close, they may be far, but a lot of times they're distinct. They are in a different area than those males. They are not together yet in most cases, at least from my experience on Chickamauga and some of the Tennessee River lakes. Alright guys, now let's talk about some baits that you can use to target these fish in shallow water. And you'll hear pros and you'll hear guys that know what they're doing on these lakes talk a lot about when you're talking cold water, hard baits. You don't see a lot of people throwing a lot of big soft plastics or anything like that. The hard baits are excellent for covering water. Some key baits that I use, especially when the water is has good visibility to it, in other words, whether it is clear to stained, I'm going to throw a lipless. So you guys know that's one of my favorite baits. Swim baits, hard swim baits, like a glide bait, and even some soft swim baits. I'll throw those if I find those fish grouped up. But just to cover water, like a glide bait. Square bills can be excellent if you find some hard bottom, as long as you're not getting hung up in leaves and things like that. Jigs, excellent for covering the structure or the cover on the structure a little bit better, especially if you're getting hung up with some of these other baits. Spinner baits, and finesse Alabama rigs. I'm talking a little bit downsized. I like a Picasso Alabama rig. Dixie Custom Lures makes a good finesse Alabama rig. Something I can put some really light weight on there and throw around in shallow cover and not worry about it getting hung up. It's similar to just throwing a spinner bait. Now, if we're talking about really stained to dirty water, I like to use a big spinner bait, nighttime spinner bait, whether that's black and blue, whether that's purple, whether that's chartreuse or white, big Colorado blade on it. And I like to use jigs, and a big jig, I want something that's going to have some thump down there. A lot of times I even put some rattles on there, but I like flipping around and getting very close to the cover on the structure. So if it's a secondary point, find a laydown on it, I'm going to spend some good amount of time right around that laydown, just soaking a bait next to it, throwing that spinner bait over and over, bumping it off there. Another thing is I like to hit stump flats with a square bill. I can just bang that square bill off the stump over and over and over in that really dirty water and hopefully get one to react to it. And that's a very important thing when we're talking about what can get these fish overnight into this early pre-spawn mood, into this moving in waves up to the shallows. And that can be a big storm like the one we had. A big warm front come out of the south. This is, I think, the 10th through 12th of February over here on Chickamauga. And we've got, the water is just rising like crazy. Because of that, my grandfather actually called me from the lake house and said it is within a few feet of being summer level right now. And so you get all this new warm water, and it's higher water, and what it does, those fish will just push up. They'll follow that water up, they'll follow it up and sit right in cover. And a lot of times when that water recedes back down, because they're going to be, you know, they're pushing 80,000 gallons a minute or whatever it is right now out of the Chickamauga Dam. The floodgates are open. They're kicking water out. But those fish, a lot of times, they'll just stay up there. They're not going to, even though the water's coming back down, they're going to stay up shallow. They're going to stay up on those bars, working their way into the creeks, and it's just going to start. It's going to kick-start this whole pre-spawn deal. And there's going to be a lot of good fishing to be done, so you don't want to be the guy that's still out throwing that rig deep or throwing that swim bait deep and doing that gig. You want to be the guy that first catches them up, aggressive, in a new spot where they haven't seen baits coming and where they're willing to make a mistake. Alright, I guess my last little few tips for you here. In this time of year, it is extremely key to cover water. You want to move and move and move, just like we talked about before, but you want to not just pick a bank and start burning down this bank, or pick a part of a creek and start burning down there. What you're going to do is you want to fish spots. You want to pull up to a secondary point and fish that point. You want to pull up to a trough in the middle of a bar and fish that bar. Fish the spot, the smaller areas that are key, where it's a high percentage that there should be a fish there, and then you want to find the spot on the spot. So what on that spot? Is there cover of some kind? Is there that grass up there? Is there a laydown up there? Is there stumps up there? Is there a big boulder up there? What is on that perfect piece of structure, cover-wise, that will have and hold those fish? And I'll tell you another thing that's great about this time of year that you can't always do on a lot of these Tennessee River reservoirs is pattern fishing. You can, this time of year, you can pattern fish better than most other periods of the year, with the exception of maybe the summer and sometimes during the fall. You can find, you know, whatever those fish are on, whether they're on wood in a shallow area, whether they are on rock in a shallow area, what kind of point as it relates to the main river, and or if they're in what part of the creek. Maybe it's the first third, maybe it's the second third. But you can run that from creek to creek and from point to point and from whatever spot to whatever spot. And a lot of times you can be very successful, and you can know right as soon as you pull up on a spot whether or not you're going to catch fish on it. And that's an awesome feeling as an angler. Alright, let's look at the Navionics real quick and look at some of these key areas we might be able to hit this time of year. Now, a lot of your winter fishing gets done out around the main river channel. So these fish will be out around this area. They'll be in these ditches and cuts and stuff. This is Harrison Bay area, so a lot of times these fish will hang out in these sorts of areas out here, you know, maybe this point or something like that, some of these cuts and things. Well, as the early pre-spawn starts, they'll start to not only flood some of these main lake areas, you know, they'll get up shallow in some of these areas over here, some of these main lake bars and cuts, such as these little humps and things. But one key area is to look, let's look at wolf teever here. A nice area to look is riprap around a bridge. That's a pinch point. When those fish are migrating their way into these areas, when they're coming through here, they have to go through this tiny funnel. So those areas are great. It is unfortunate that a lot of times there's a ton of people around them, so it's difficult to fish, but they'll start to follow this creek channel. Here's an example of a highway, you know, your creek channel running through there. Sometimes, remember I mentioned channel swing banks in the creek like this are excellent. You find laydowns, you fish those, you find little rock jetties out from that, and then the little saddles beyond it are really good as well. But I like points, so I like something like this. They might be on this rounded edge, they might be on the sharp edge. Again, you get a rounded part of the point right here and then a sharp part. So somewhere along through there, those fish will begin to stack up. They typically will continue on that old creek channel, so you can follow that back. There's another perfect example of a good point right there. But you just follow that back, and you fish spots. So you jump, boom, you hit that spot, boom, you hit that spot, boom, you hit that spot. You don't sit here and fish a whole stretch unless you just start catching fish down through here. It's just usually not a good idea. You end up burning up a lot of time, and even though the days are longer, it's still no excuse to waste any time, because you got to maximize every second that you're out there. But all right, I really hope y'all enjoyed today's episode. I've actually got some good footage coming up of around Harrison Bay. I went down there to practice fish for Cody at Bass Bullies. He had a tournament down there the other day and was able to catch some real nice fish. Caught one about 4.5, and one just under 6 on a rig. They were still out deep at that point, but I'm hoping, as we talked about today, that that'll be changing soon. So y'all stay tuned for that. I've got some good pointers on that one, and we'll have some more fishing related videos coming up. So let me know what you like. Do you like this content where I'm teaching you, where you're still getting to see some fish catches, but I'm teaching you about something specific that's going on? Or do you like to just see me hop out on the boat and go out and fish for a day? So just let me know what you guys want to see. Remember, as always, like this video, subscribe to my channel, click that little bell, that notification up there. That'll notify you when I have a new video out, so you know what's going on the lake. And I guess I'll catch y'all next time.